What's going on, YouTube? Metal Complex here, and today I've got a discussion video that I've wanted to do for a long time, and that's choil or no choil. I want to talk about the benefits and the disadvantages to the forward choil being present on your knife. If you are new to my channel and you like daily knife content, this might be the channel for you. I like to do reviews, overviews, unboxings, and discussion videos such as this one. I also have a knife series on Sunday called The Knife Guy, where I talk about, general stuff that we experience as we evolve as knife guys and knife gals in our own social setting. So if that all sounds good to you, please subscribe and make sure your notifications are set to all because I upload daily. Anyways, so, a lot of us we have preferences, in terms of, well, obviously all of us have preferences when it comes to our pocket knives, but very few people in my experience will say, I don't really care if there's a choil there or not, whatever. People are either very strictly, I have to have that choil, or I don't like them. I want more blade. You either want more blade for the overall size of your knife, or you want the feeling of control and an advantage in ergonomics. Now, this does depend on the design, and the overall, length of the blade and the handle can affect it. There's a lot of things here. I have a bunch of knives laid out that I think represent, a lot of what's possible in the common knife world and some familiar designs and some good examples here. All of the knives on the table are between 7 inches and about 9 inches. Some of them do not have choils at all, like this one here and these two. But these two here don't really have choils, but they've got areas up by the blade where the blade doesn't really start for a little bit and you can kind of choke up. Then I have knives that are absolutely, that have choils, like the XM18, that do not have flipper tabs. And I've got like the Bag Steelcraft series Bodega that has a choil, but it also has a flipper tab, which changes how your finger interacts with that area. Then I have knives like the Para 3 and the Spyderco, which have choils, and they have a defined area of safety, this nub right here, that keeps you close to the blade, but far enough back that you're not going to be running your finger up. The reason that both of them are in there is because the Shaman is a much larger knife, a lot more room in the handle, and the Para 3 is a much smaller knife, but it has the same style of choil. So what's the advantage to having that forward choil there? Well, the advantage is that situations where you really want to control the blade, and you want to control what the edge is cutting, how, and if you're cutting something way out here and your hands are clear back here, you don't have as much control. The blade is, in terms of the movements that you make back here, this end of the blade or the middle of the blade is reacting more, dramatically to that material in much more jerky movements than if you were clear up here and making little tiny cuts and movements right beside your finger. So it allows for control. It also allows for a feeling of just, comfort in your hand. Now the downside is that you pretty much always will be sacrificing a chunk of the blade in terms of the cutting edge. Now, some people prefer more cutting edge. Now, the argument that I always hear is for people who are in favor of choils is, why do I need a blade that's that long? Look at the Steelcraft series bag. This is a big knife, about almost 9 inches overall, I think. Might be right at 9 inches. You've got a choil here, but even with the presence of the choil, you have a massive cutting edge. It's still like 3.5 inches. Let's look at the cutting edge versus the Ritter Hogue. The actual cutting edge of the bag, even with the presence of the choil, is substantial. Even more, it's got more cutting edge than the Hogue Ritter, which doesn't have a choil at all. Now, the overall length of the bag is much larger, over an inch larger than the Doug Ritter. So that's kind of a downside. In order to get both the choil and that much cutting edge, you would have to carry a substantially larger knife. So anyways, the common argument is why do I care about having such a large blade length? What do I need that for? Well, a lot of times the stuff that you would normally cut with a pocket knife doesn't necessarily demand that you have an incredibly lengthy blade. In fact, knives like the Bird, which is here off camera, and the Delica, and the Para 3, these are more common-sized pocket knives. In fact, to the common person, these are all still large pocket knives. For the everyman, the common man, which I have maintained is about 80% of people that will use a pocket knife, whether they are knife enthusiasts or just regular people who carry pocket knives, those are going to do everything for those people. Like for me, I'm pretty much an everyman. It's like I've said, I do stuff on the weekends. It requires a little bit more of my pocket knives, but as far as my work week goes, I'm just doing regular stuff. So I don't really need to be carrying stuff like this. Do I like to? Oh yeah, definitely. I definitely carry stuff that I don't need to carry because it makes me happy, and I don't care, and I'm able to here. It's legal for me to do that here, and my workplace environment allows it. So I do it because it's fun. But do I need to? No. And for the most part, I don't need a crazy blade length because I'm not cutting into material that is dense enough to ask that much of my overall blade length. Now, in some situations, though, there are situations where you might want excess blade length over the choil. If you find yourself in a situation where you're cutting into something, like if you can imagine with me a fruit, like a really large cucumber or a pineapple or something. If you are, now obviously you're like, well, why wouldn't you use a kitchen knife for that? You probably would have a kitchen knife at your disposal in a setting where you're trying to cut into a pineapple. But some people might not. Some people might just be carrying their pocket knife so that it's convenient in that moment. Is it always the right tool for the job? No. There's always somebody in my comment section going, you should just carry a box cutter. That's what or use the right tool for the job. In some situations, actually, a lot of the reasons that a lot of us carry pocket knives is not because we think that pocket knife will actually be able to do every last little thing in exactly the right way. It's just convenient, Is a para 3 exactly the right knife to be cutting open a pineapple? No. Could I do it with the para 3? Yeah, I could. But the fact that the blade is so short is going to make it a little bit harder to get all the way through that pineapple, The blade on the Shaman is a little bit bigger. It might be a little bit easier, but I'm still missing some blade length here. And the fact that it's got a choil not only is not going to help me get through that pineapple, it's probably going to hang up a little bit on that little nub. As far as the knives on the table go, the ones that are going to be easiest to get through that pineapple is going to be something with a larger blade and something that's not going to get hung up on the pineapple as much, especially the fully flat ground blade of the rat. That's really going to make it easy. Now, a pineapple is still wider than the blade, but you get my point. Another example that I can use, one that's not quite as relatable, but another reason you might not want a choil is if you're cutting into something that you really don't want your hand up close to. A lot of times I'll come down on knives, that have a thumb stud that's in the cutting path. You can see here the Hogue Ritter has that issue a little bit. I almost cut my finger there. Not too bad, but that in combination with my hand position, I'm way off. Way a ways from where that blade can safely cut straight down into material. But if you're cutting into something that you don't want to touch, if you're cutting into something that might release a chemical, or maybe if you're cutting into, not that I would recommend this, soft metal that can shear off and create shards, you're cutting into something, maybe you're cutting beside glass, like on a window, you're trying to cut through caulking or something like that, and you move too quickly and you shatter the glass, you're not going to want your hand close. Maybe you're trying to cut into a cactus. I don't know. But you're not going to want your hand that close to it. So sometimes it does benefit you to have a longer blade. There's probably a billion other examples that I'm not thinking of, where I wouldn't want my hand closed. Me personally, I have and continue to make cuts like this where I'll need to cut into plywood, or I'll need to make a quick cut, or kind of cut something. When you're roofing or you're adding onto your house, how many times you've been in a situation where you make the cut and you're all the way up on the ladder and you put it in and the stupid thing doesn't fit. You didn't cut it exactly right. The saying is measure twice, cut once. That applies most of the time, but sometimes it just doesn't work out the way that you want. And when you're in a position where it's really inconvenient to go all the way back down and recut it and risk cutting too much material, sometimes I will actually take my pocket knife and just make a quick sort of, unconventional cut to make that wood fit around where I'm trying to get it to fit. And then I'll use a tamping hammer or something to just pound it into place. We like to call that good enough. My dad owns a construction company, and that is the joke, that we'll just hammer something into place and say good enough. Now, I know a lot of you kind of roll your eyes and say that's not quality craftsmanship, but believe me, It happens. I don't care who you are. It definitely happens. I will make a quick cut, and cutting into plywood, you get splinters and shards and things. I don't want to be holding my knife up this close. And you can say, well, you can just hold the knife clear back here. That's fine, but if you're cutting deep enough into it and it's coming up right here, it could potentially get hung up. So a knife like this, where it's got a clear spot where the media can start up against this area right here, and you can push down, or a knife like the Ritter Hogue, it might get caught up on the thumb stud, but I appreciate that. My hand is away from it. I can get the blade in there. It's fairly guided. It's going to do that. A knife that's got a choil is just going to put me at a disadvantage. A lot of times, especially like this or something that's shorter, where the media can really get hung up on this area that's designed to lock your finger in or catch on that nub. Now, this just goes right into the whole no knife is absolutely perfect. I have crowned the XM18 3.5 inch non-flipper Gen 6 spear point, God, that's a lot to say, as my current Excalibur, or the closest thing to it. It's technically not Excalibur. And by the way, Excalibur is the word I use to describe the absolutely perfect folding knife, the most versatile. Maybe it's not the very best at every single thing, and maybe there are certain things that it's simply not capable of, but it is what I would consider to be one of the most versatile knives on the planet, and also has all of the aesthetic features that I like and all of the manipulation features I like as far as deployment and the lock. But it's still not one. This isn't a knife that I'd really want to be choked up on, poking into stuff that I really wouldn't want my hand close to. I can move back here and it's still going to do a pretty good job of that, but there are knives that are going to do better at that. So when you're selecting a knife, as far as whether or not it has a choil, you have to ask yourself, like, what am I going to be doing with this thing? If you're in an office setting, it probably doesn't matter. If you're in an office setting, whatever, pick the one that just makes you happy. But if you're really going to put your knife to work all the time, it depends on the type of work that you're going to be doing. And I'm saying things that it's not like this is a revelation for people. It's not like you guys don't know that that's the case, but it is fun to kind of talk about, and it's not just choil or no choil. It's how big of a blade are you getting? I mean, like, the differences here just between the Rat and the Doug Ritter, they're, when you look at these, it's like, well, as far as like what I would use these two knives for, it's probably about the same. But as far as where the start of the blade is in relationship with your index finger, it is different on each of these. And you still have kind of a choil position with the Rat. But because of where this line is and the grind, being flat versus there not being that line present, there not being a choil on this blade, and the thumb stud being more in the cutting path and this blade being ground a little bit different, it will change how the knife interacts with what you're cutting. Enough to make enough to be at the point where you're like, I just can't use this tool for this task. No, probably not. Understand, again, that I am an obsessive person who likes to think about little things like these, and I know that you guys like to watch discussion videos like this, so this is fun for me. It's fun to discuss this. And the designers of these knives have thought tenfold about this, 100-fold about this, and that's how we end up with all of these different designs, these ergonomic designs, these blade geometry designs. So there are advantages and disadvantages to it. I know that, it's like I said, people either prefer to have it or prefer not to have it. I always like to have it, and here's my reasoning behind it. What I found out is that, my joy when it comes to a folding knife, what really makes me, it is the look, it's the feel, the feeling of a premium material, and just the knowing, like just something as simple as seeing 20 CV on a blade, USA, brings me happiness, all of that. Nothing quite brings me, the same happiness as the feeling of perfect ergonomics. And it's the reason why I love contouring so much. It's the reason that I love the Shannon so much. The XM18 might have the best sum of all, the averages of things that I enjoy, and that's how I have concluded that it's my favorite pocket knife all the way around. But the king of ergonomics for me is definitely the Shaman. Definitely. I am well aware of the disadvantages of having a blade set up like this and the disadvantages of having a shorter blade length. Maybe I'm not going to be able to easily cut through pineapples, and maybe I would be putting myself at a risk getting my fingers so close to the blade and cutting into things that could potentially wound me. But I would rather have it because I enjoy the freedom that I have with this knife in terms of my hand position. I'm so free and it's so comfortable. I can find a way to manipulate this knife into, using it however I need to use it in a given situation. And if it comes to a point where it's simply not the right tool, then I'm just not going to use it. I'll use the right tool. I haven't been in too many situations where the knife is the only thing. There've been a couple of times way up high on a ladder where I've had a strap get stuck, and it was either make that cut or the tension on the strap's going to pull you and the ladder away from the building. In that situation, yeah, you use the knife however you need to. You can use if in that situation, the knife is a cutting tool and a pry bar and a hammer and a spear and whatever else it needs to be, But in most situations, I have other tools at my disposal and I will use them. So I would prefer that my all-purpose cutting tool, or the tool that's going to be used for a lot of things, cutting and maybe outside of cutting things, I just want to have that feeling of security on the handle and that feeling of comfort, because it feels like a quality thing to me, But you guys may not have ergonomics of your pocket knife up on such a pedestal. You may not care as much, Something else to consider, something I haven't touched on quite as much is, when you have, like, for example, the XM18, we've got two XM18 3.5 inch models here. They're actually both spear points, and they're both full titanium. They're both Gen 6. Now, one's a vintage and one's the standard production in 20 CV, but the only difference here is that, besides the aesthetics, is that one has a flipper and one doesn't. You can see there the tri-way on this guy, no flipper. The tri-way's on the flipper on this guy. Now, the choils are the exact same size between these knives, but if you look here, the flipper tab actually creates an ergonomic issue. You are forced into the parameters that are set by the edge of this blade and the flipper tab itself, meaning you have less room here. Now with my fingers, it's not going to be the case with all fingers, but with my fingers, when I want to get all the way up here and get in my cardboard cutting position, I know box cutter guys, box cutters are better at cardboard cutting. I just like to use my knives for that. This puts me at a risk. You can see there my finger wanting to fold around that initial point where it goes from dull to sharp. I can and have cut myself doing that before, so it puts you at a disadvantage. You have to pull back here and get to a thinner part of your finger to be able to use that efficiently. Now, a lot of people may not ever lock into that choil any more than this. This might be where you naturally hold the knife to do those types of tasks. But for me, the reason that I find so much enjoyment with the non-flipper is because I've got more room here. I actually can lock in and keep my fingers safely away because I can rest some of the meat of my finger up where the flipper tab would be, but isn't. So I like that, and that's something to consider when you're thinking about getting a knife that has a flipper tab but also has a choil. You might be limited. It's the same issue, despite this knife being a lot bigger, it's the same issue. Once I get up here, my finger's interacting with that spot. Now, if the flipper tab weren't there, look at all the extra room that I would have. The Shaman kind of is like that, but it has this nub that creates this distance between the last part of the choil and the cutting edge. And that's what I really like, because I can really get up there. There is no chance my finger's coming off that nub and going onto the blade. I know people want to tell me, but that nub comes around and it swings in there and it touches your finger and it's annoying. After you have the Shaman for a little bit, that stops being a thing. The only disadvantage is with the Shaman setup and the PM2 setup and the Para 3 setup, the way that they've got that guard there. Same with the Manix. I have the Manix and the PM2 off camera. It's the same setup. They've got the nubs there that keep your finger. The only issue there is that that if you're cutting into something that requires the blade to go super deep, that media or that material or whatever it is that you're cutting can get hung up on the nub and the jimping that's on the inside of the choil. Oh boy, this was a long, rambly conversation. It's a kind of a funny topic to talk for 20 minutes about, but I really like digging into the ideas behind this, and I hope you guys found this at least entertaining. Obviously, there's a lot more that can go into it. I don't know how necessary it is to dig too deep into this, but if you guys have your own thoughts, I'm always happy to hear. So leave your comments down in the comments section, and we can all, so everybody can kind of look over there and consider the different circumstances that may be applicable to the topic here. But in any case, if you enjoyed this video or at least found it mildly entertaining, please leave a like. If you'd like to check out my other content, I do, of course, have lots of videos of knives that are either expensive or inexpensive that I do or don't like, so check those out. And if you enjoy all my content, then please subscribe to my channel because there's definitely more coming. Thanks again for watching, and have a great day.